Morning, everybody. It's a blessing to be back here and be able to see everyone. I feel like I'm echoing weird. But if you have your Bibles this morning, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. Matthew chapter 14. And I want to be honest with y'all, this devotion is very scatterbrained. And you're going to have to stick with me for a little bit. But hopefully we'll get there. But we're going to begin in verse 22. And I'm sure most of y'all have heard this story, but maybe we'll figure something out. Verse 22 says, "And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. So here we see the disciples out in this boat, and all around them the wind's blowing, the waves are coming up, and they're beating the sides of the ship, and it's just tossing their boat around a little bit. You know, it's enough to kind of make them, I'm not going to say be afraid, but kind of be cautious, so to say. And if you look there at verse 22, you'll be reminded that Jesus is the one who commanded them to go on board and go on this ship. But then Jesus comes walking on the water, and they're all scared and they're all worrying because they think it's a spirit. But then he tells them who he is. But don't tell me out yet. Got a little bit more to go. But in verse 28 it says, And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. So here we have Peter, trusting in Jesus, out there on the water, asking to join him. Peter knows it's Jesus out there on the water because he knows only Jesus has the power to let him walk out there on the water to see him. Then we see in verse 29 that Peter begins walking on the water. Peter right now has all his faith in Jesus when he takes those first few steps. Do you know how much faith that would take to take your foot out past that boat and just step on the water? That first step of faith. This is me whenever God tells me to do something. When he first tells me, I'm sitting there thinking, I can do this. You're right, God, we got this, you know. And like I'll start doing it with all the faith I have, you know, and I'm going to do what you told me to, Lord. I get confident, you know, I start, you know, maybe more running across the water, just ready to go. But let's read on in verse 30, and he said, But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. Beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. Peter began looking around at the world, seeing what's going on around him, and he began sinking. He began sinking. He didn't just drop right into the water and have to swim. He started sinking. Maybe at first he didn't even realize it, you know, all of a sudden his feet are a little wet, and just kept on moving up the more he looked around. But he took his eyes off the Lord. And the fear inside of him from all the things that's going on around the world around him, it built up because he's slowly sinking into the water. You know, he's able to look around, see the waves, see the wind blowing inside, and the water's just coming up. He's going down. He was in danger. He didn't know what to do. There was nobody around him to help him except for Jesus. He had no choice but to call out to the Lord. This is exactly what I do. I start off, you know, having my faith in him, but then I look around, see how my situation is. I get out there and look in the world, and I see everything that's going on in my life, where I'm at, trying to find the Lord. I take my eyes off him. I get in my own head, and I'll start doubting. And I let that fear of me sinking in the water stop me from serving the Lord. Not even just sinking in the water, just the fear of it. I get scared that I'm going to go under. And that reflects on him badly. It takes away the glory from him whenever I can't serve right, people see me sinking. Whenever people see me going into that water and me getting scared, whenever it's the Lord who sent me out there, it reflects badly on him. But as we continue in verse 31, it says, "And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said to him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt?" Peter was sinking down there, and immediately Jesus reached out his hand as soon as he called out to him. As soon as Peter turned to Jesus, he was right there, ready to help him. Jesus then pulls Peter up and he says, Wherefore didst thou doubt? Why do I doubt him? He saved me from sin time and time again, and he saved me, and he keeps on saving me from different problems that I get myself into. He's led me this far. He's never forsaken me, and he's done so much for me. But every time I start sinking, he reaches down there and he helps me back up. Helps me back on the path to him. But no matter what, I always end up taking my eyes off him. But for him to help you today, you have to take that first step. When Peter stepped out, he didn't let the fear of sinking in the water get to him. He didn't let the fear of falling in stop him from at least trying to serve the Lord. He had the faith to step out. And when things did get bad around him, it was his own fault, as it is always mine whenever things start getting worse. He cried out to the Lord, and as soon as he did, he was there. The Lord stepped in. He helped him. The Lord won't leave you sinking today, brethren. He'll always be there as soon as you cry out to him. Don't let the fear of sinking, failing, losing stop you from trusting in his plan. Because it's his plan. He's perfect. Brother Nathan gave a series of lessons on how God's still on plan A. He's still on plan A. He's always going to be there for us no matter what we do wrong. Because that's who Jesus is. He's forgiving. He's more forgiving than I ever could be, and I'm very grateful that he is forgiving. And if you're lost here today, you already are sinking. You're already in that water and you're going down. You can't wait forever to trust in him. He's just sitting there waiting. As soon as you cry out to him, he's there for you. He is right there. All you have to do is put your faith that he'll help you out of the water. That's all I have this morning, and it helped me throughout this week. And I hope y'all got something out of it. But kids are dismissed their Sunday schools, wherever that's going to go, and Dad, if you'll come.
Well, it's good to see everybody this morning. Is this really loud? More than you? It seems like I can. Okay. It seems loud. All right. Seems like this has been a long time coming. If you would, we're going to be in Genesis 6 this morning. I'm going to go ahead and do announcements and get them out of the way so we don't interrupt services after this. As far as announcements go, next Sunday will be the same as today. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock preaching. Wednesday nights are going to be normal. Come sit in church Wednesday nights. Brother Tyler will be doing devotion next Sunday, so pray for him this week. Brother Matt's doing the Wednesday night lesson, I believe. So pray for him this week as well. As far as prayer requests goes, let's pray for the lost kids, the lost people in our church. We all got lost family. Pray for our church. Pray for unity in our church. Tracy's grandfather. Hugh Riles. Virgie's not here. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to her, but she's on her way. Okay. Her son Timmy, he was supposed to get a kidney biopsy. I don't know how that went. And her son Matthew, both are lost. Pray for Steve and Liz's parents both. And Brother Cantu texted this morning. His mom's in recovery. He's really concerned about her spiritual condition, but she's facing a lot of depression. She found out, she's got cancer. It's been one thing after another. She's lost. She's battling this in the flesh, and she's not wanting to take her medicine and move on. And so, it's a great concern to our family as well. So pray for them, and then pray for Allie and baby. I found out yesterday we're not naming it Earl. I need to pray about that because, I had to do a little repenting because we were going to name the boy Earl and the girl Pearl. But whatever. All right, so Genesis 6. So a long, long time ago, like 2 months ago or something, when this first started, we were in Job chapter 1, and there were a few verses we referenced in Job 1 where it was talking about the sons of God and how they'd come before God in Job chapter 1, and we referenced Genesis chapter 6. And so when that happened, it got my mind to twisting around and thinking, and so we're going to kind of be here, and hopefully, Lord willing, we're going to be here for quite some time. I just want to state, though, that I got some fine print. Today's an introduction sort of lesson, and we're going to try to take our time and see why things are going to be happening down the road as far as what we're reading. And there's going to be a lot in the first 4 verses that we won't cover today, but Lord willing, we're going to kind of come back and cover it. There's a lot in this chapter. We're going to try to get in and look at how wicked man had gotten. And also, for at least today, we're not going to dive into the weather system as far as what we're going to be talking about. We're going to bring that out later on. So, if you want to talk to me about it after church, you can. Maybe it'll come out. We're not going to get into pre-flood, post-flood stuff this morning yet. So let's kind of paint a broad picture of the book of Genesis so far. In Genesis 1, we have the 6 days of creation. God speaks things into existence that did not exist. The power that we see in verse 1, and as we heard, we even can see a picture of salvation there. In chapter 2, we see the 7th day, the day of rest, how God chose to do things God's way and in God's time. We also see the creation of man and woman. In chapter 3, we see temptation. We see the first lie ever told. We see the fall of man and the curse that comes with that. All that in the first 3 chapters of the Bible. In chapter 4, Adam and Eve have sons, Cain and Abel. We see the first murder. Abel was murdered by his brother Cain. In chapter 4, it didn't take long for man to mess things up. At the end of chapter 4, we notice that there are descendants. We see Lamech and Seth, 2 bloodlines that can come out here. In chapter 5, we get a closer look at the descendants of Adam. We see in verse 32, the last verse of chapter 5, before we're going to get into chapter 6 here, we see Noah mentioned. Noah is 500 years, well, let's just read the verse. It says, and Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah was 500 years old. A little side note that we're going to, Lord willing, get in later. The way these names are listed are not in age. Shem is listed first. He is not the oldest son. Shem's bloodline would enter or would bring the lineage of Christ. He's mentioned first for a reason. He's not the oldest son. So going into chapter 6, we see all the things in the first 5 chapters. And then we see Noah come on the scene. He's 500 years old and he's a father. So we could probably talk about that for a while, but we're not going to this morning. Chapter 6, let's look at the first couple of verses. It says, and it came to pass when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. The daughters of man. We see that listed here, or we see this. The daughters of man represents a rebellion. Okay? It's a degenerate way. It's a brokenness that's there. And the two are starting to look the same. We see the increase of mankind in verse 1. It says, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth. Why is that? Well, turn over to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. God tells us right here. Genesis 1:28 says, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. They were doing what God said. So we see man multiplying. And if we think about these verses, let's think about the world we live in today. Has the earth, as we know it, ever been as populated as it is now? There's always been something to come along, let's say, to keep numbers in check. Looking at it from the flesh, that's how it's been. There's been plagues, there's been pandemics, coronas, whatever. Stuff's came, and mankind, the population up and down, up and down. So we think of the world we're living in today, and God's allowing this, even in this time, in this timeline on God's plan here in chapter 6, but also in our day, in 2020, God is allowing the earth to be as populated as it is. We see multiplication of man on the earth. And in a way, you see God's hand in all of it, because how can the earth, with the billions of people on earth, how can it support itself right now? That within itself is a work of God. God is allowing it, and young people in here, I'd ask you to hear this, like we read in chapter 6, 1 and 2. Do not look at the sons and daughters of men. They may be fair to look upon, but they will lead you to judgment. Just like we're going to talk about this morning, hopefully. We could probably sum up verse 1 and 2 and just simply say, the more sinners, the more sin. The more people, the uglier it gets oftentimes. I'm quoting a Matthew Henry quote here, but he said the infectious diseases are most destructive to mankind, and sin is spreading leprosy. We are contaminated. We contaminate others with our actions, with our thoughts. So in verse 2, we see mixed marriages. The line of Seth has started to mingle perhaps with the line of Cain, who was cast out. It says, clear as the nose on your face there. And let's read verse 2. It says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. They saw they were fair. They were fair to the eyes. But what about the rest? There's more to a spouse than what you see on the outside. They saw the flesh. We see, without any advice, without any consideration, they saw something they wanted. In effect, we see teachings here of the dangers of being unequally yoked with someone of the world. We recall what happened to Solomon, a wise man, wisest man who ever lived, perhaps. He had a lot of wives. It just took one to turn his eyes away from God. And he prayed for wisdom. Another thought comes to mind of Samson, looking out, and we know that this was of God, but even his father said, can you not find a woman of your own tribe? He was looking with the flesh, not with the spiritual side of it. Let's look at verse 3 here in chapter 6. It says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. It's funny that Reese brought it up, because I have it written down. Brother Nathan brought it out a while back. This is not God's plan B. Oftentimes, man will read this verse and say, well, God did this, but then man did this, so God had to react this way. That's not the case. God's in control here. He didn't try something and see how it was going to go. He knew how it was going to go. This, however, could be said that this was a sign of God's displeasure with mankind, in what we read in verse 3. at those who perhaps had married strange wives who were getting away from God. The threat of being withdrawn from God, that's a real threat. We see judgment, though, because God withdrawing from you is present in that verse, and that within itself is judgment when God withdraws from you. We see in verse 3 that there was 120 years given to man after the warning was given. Man had 120 years. To strive with man, the conviction of God, we see here, God is going to judge mankind. He's going to judge the earth, is what we're reading in verse 6. We see that the 120 years is the length of deferred judgment. Justice says, cut them down, but mercy intercedes. Time and time again in the Bible, we see where the right, just thing to do is wipe it out. But mercy steps in its place and says no. Hopefully, Lord willing, we're going to see a great picture of salvation over the next couple weeks. We also can say here that the verses we've read, we do not see a limitation on God's patience. You say, well, he's going to judge. That doesn't mean his patience run out. We see a limitation on the time given, not the patience, not the long suffering. Though God bears a great while with sinners like me, he will not always bear with the sin. I will be judged. You will be judged. Judgment is coming. Whether we're talking Genesis 6 or Revelation, judgment's coming. Verse 4, it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. When we read that verse, I guarantee you in your mind, the word stuck out to you as giants. You're like, okay, well, why is that there? What are we talking about? Because we see it here, and then we see it later on, even when the children of Israel are looking at the promised land, they felt small. The Hebrew word for that is, I'm going to say this wrong, Nephilium, and it means mighty one. So let's think about that. Some would translate this as princes or kings, those with power. So the sons of God have been marrying women of the world and having children. And naturally, what does man do? We sin. We lean toward the flesh. When we're left alone, we go the fleshly way. And this men of old and renown, it could be said that they became powerful in the flesh and in the world. I was thinking about this for a few days. I can't really do it justice and explain it, but it's odd to me that man wants to and can have power over other people. Mankind wants that. And we see that in sixes. We see power over others, but yet oftentimes we have no power over ourselves. Think about that. Oftentimes we can't even stop ourselves from doing something we know we shouldn't do, and yet we want to have power over someone else. So we see, though, that man's always wanted power. I believe we can see that in this verse, where man has always wanted to have, whether it's earthly possessions, whether it's regions, women, whatever the case may be, man wants that power. Verse 5, it says, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That verse scares me to death. I believe that verse could be said every day that mankind's been on this earth. I pondered on this. And I don't know, I can't get up here and tell you, I don't want to get into my personal thoughts of just how wicked the earth was in what we're reading here. It was enough that God felt like it was time to step in. But we could say this our day and time. And I know a few months back we studied 2 Timothy, and we see how man was infatuated with themselves. In the end time, man is just going to be so infatuated with himself that he doesn't even respect his parents. He doesn't respect anyone around him. It's all about me, me, me. And we kind of talked about how we feel like that's how we are. I think that's also what was going on in chapter 6 here. And it says, every imagination, that is every thought, every dream, every intent, every drive, every motivation, every action taken, the way you even treated others, your own wife, was evil. It was bad. Man only thought about the gains, only thinking of themselves, only serving self. Just another side note again, but especially for the younger folks, and this is something I need to apply literally for what I'm fixing to say. You are what you eat, okay? Meaning if I eat a bunch of junk food, I'm going to be junk. Well, if I allow a bunch of thoughts in my life and in my mind, it's going to come out. The things on the inside come to the outside. The thoughts that I have inside come out. The words that I hear, if I'm around a lot of language, if I'm around that, eventually it's in my vocabulary. It's going to come out whether I want it to or not. It's here. It's coming out. So I would tell you, young people, watch what you allow in your life. Let's look at verse 6 here. It says, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." I read this verse a lot the other day studying, and I went back and forth. I love the writing in this verse. When I read it, I think of love, that God tolerates me. At the very least, he loves me. He loves me enough to save me, just like Noah, and we're going to look at that. This verse says it repented God. Well, what is repentance? It's a turning away from. For mankind, it's a roundabout. We turn away, we see what we are before God, and we don't want anything to do with our old selves. We turn away from it, and we turn to God. That's repenting. Well, God's looking at his own creation. He took some dirt, some spit, and some love and made me. God turned here from sinful man. Again, this verse doesn't mean that God made a mistake, but says that God stepped in and judged when God knew he would, when he needed to, for God's will to be done on this earth as we know it. Also, I believe that it could be said that it troubled God that mankind had pained him or greatly sinned, and judgment was coming. God's resentment for sin. A lot of time we tend to get this idea, and I don't know that we do so much as, I'm trying to think how to word this. I don't know that we do so much as the world who thinks God's always on their side. Who the people that like to listen to some Joel Osteen, I guess. Everything's positive. All right. God's not a spectator in your life. He's not cheering you on from the sideline. He has a personal will for your life. He wants you to obey him. He's not just sitting here saying, "Oh, please do that." Yeah, you did it. No, he's involved. He loves you. He created you. He has a purpose for you. But at the end of the day, God's God. No matter how you look at him, no matter what you think of him, God is God. And one day you will see him as God. The thoughts here in reading this, and how an almighty, all holy, perfect God can repent of his own creation, makes me think of the way I look at love in the flesh. Love is great. Love makes you feel good. But guess what? Love can hurt, and it's painful sometimes. And there's a lot of growing pains. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of why. Sometimes there's a lot of, fisticuffs, we could say. But when it's right, it's great. But we can't get it right. I couldn't, and I've said this a lot, I couldn't even love my wife like I should until I knew how Christ loved me. I can't reciprocate that kind of love until I have it. So God in the beginning of Genesis creates man, and we're earth dwellers, and he creates a habitation for man. and he furnished it. Think about that. He said, here it is. It's comfortable. It's perfect. These are the rules. This is yours. And we try to do that with our own kids to stay in time. And then we watch them mess up just like we did back in Genesis, in the early book of Genesis there in 3. We're like, here's this for your life. Here's this. I'm doing this for you. Here it is. And then they mess up. We're like, what are you doing? You know? But we keep making the same mistakes over and over again oftentimes. Man was given the strength and the power that God saw necessary. We are wonderfully made. And yet we can mess it up pretty fast. The writings here, I believe in verse 6, shows God's power and control. And at least to me it does. It shows how just God is. How perfect he is in verse 6. We see, I think, for lack of a better word, we see a passion. We see judgment. We see how man grieves God. That I'm loved enough by a perfect, holy God who created me, that my actions grieve him. But we also see how perfect God is. If this was being wrote to how I reacted to something, I thought about that. This is how God reacted. This is how we see his perfect reaction in verse 6. If this was being wrote to me, well, Jason talked to his wife, or Jason called Brother Roger or Brother Steve, and Jason asked him about this, and this is how Jason reacted. He kind of underreacted where he should have overreacted. He kind of overreacted where he should have underreacted. He talked when he shouldn't have, But my reactions can't be perfect. We see God's perfect reaction to the situation mankind's put themselves in. And listen, understand this. Mankind put themselves in this situation. God did not. You cannot blame a perfect God. So let's just drop that. Verse 7, it says, And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. We see judgment. We see ownership. Man whom I have created. But I'll tell you, it breaks my heart. We see a greater consequence, really, to mankind's wickedness. The face of the earth would never be the same because of sin. Let's look at the verse one more time. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created. So not just, there's man from the face of the earth, but then look, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, the fowls of the air. Man's sin had been so bad it affected the birds. Okay? For it repenteth me that I have made them. And we're going to talk about that. I know some of you are like, I don't know about that. We're going to talk about that. The face of the earth would never be the same. Man would be judged, but also beasts would suffer because of man's sin. Every creeping thing, to me, that's animal and plant. Anything that crawls, any grass that creeps and just keep, how that stuff just keeps going out into your driveway. Every creeping thing. Nothing would be the same. Even the birds had been affected by man's wickedness. These things that God had made for man, they were made for man, would ultimately suffer because of man. Well, why were they made for man? Why? For man to honor and glorify God with them. That's why we have anything. The things made for man would be destroyed with man. These things, again, were made that man may honor God, but when man serves self, all things are in sin. We can take something God made and it can become sin in our life. It makes me think, and we're not going to go there for time's sake today, but when it talks about a new heaven and a new earth, and I've had this thought taught to me, think of how bad we've made this earth, whether it's, I'm not a tree hugger, whether it's machinery, you walk down the beach or down the lakeside, you're going to see trash. Just think about how we've trashed this earth. It's unacceptable before a holy, perfect God. So a few side thoughts here in closing. When you read this, especially in verse 6, we see how God despises sin. to the point where he repented that he had made man. And it doesn't say he repented that he made the earth. It said that he had repented, he made man on the earth. So we see how God despises sin. And what a mocker I am, a sinner like me coming before a perfect, holy God, asking for forgiveness of the same sin time and time again. And yet he doesn't despise me. Why? Mercy. Turn to Isaiah 27 and we'll close out. Isaiah 27, verse 11. Again, this is kind of a introduction, so I just ask you bear with me this morning and kind of tolerate it. We're going to get into it. But I wanted to look at this verse because it talks about the Creator. Isaiah 27, verse 11, it says, when the boughs thereof are withered, they shall be broken off. The women come and set them on fire, for it is a people of no understanding. Therefore he that made them will not have mercy on them, and he that formed them will show them no favor. Judgment is coming. That's the title of the lesson or whatever we're fixing to get into. Judgment's coming. And it's not just coming in chapter 6 where we can read it and understand it. One day, it's coming for us. Coming for the earth as we know it. And the end of that verse, he that made them will have no mercy on them. If that don't give you chills, we're nothing without mercy. I can't even stand here this morning without mercy. No mercy on them, and he that formed them will show them no favor. We're favored. That's judgment. We're reading that verse. One day every man will see that the Creator is God. All these thoughts that man has on how the earth was formed and the things that happened. And I'm not even trying to argue that with anybody this morning. I'm just saying, one day, all mankind, any man ever born, will see God as the Creator. You're going to look at him and you're going to say, man, you're God. And it's going to be too late for some. That's scary. I don't glory in saying that. It's going to be late. But not all creation will see God as Savior. They will see God for God, but it will be too late for them to see God as Savior. That should tell us we got work to do. And it's not of us, but listen, we got a job to do. But all man, again, will one day see the Creator as a holy, perfect God. And we can say it, and our human fleshly minds can't even fathom what this earth would be like without mercy on it right now. Just think about that. We want to talk about the struggles and the pains and the things going on. We're showed, and it was said this morning, I believe, but we're showed mercy every single day. Imagine this earth. The thought I've always had when I think about this, the thought I've always had is when God's people were taken off this earth, imagine what the world would be like without the light of Jesus in God's people. That's a thought. So again, pray about it. Lord willing, we're going to dive. We might get deeper. I don't know. I don't want to say. Just pray God's will be done, and we'll go from there. Brother Mark, would you dismiss us this morning?